Hey folks, I've been shooting a lot over the last month or so with Tamron's new 90mm macro SP lens. I've been traveling through South America with it, and in today's video I want to give you my top 5 tips for getting great macros on when you're traveling, and also talk to you a bit about using it for portraiture. First of all, let's talk a little bit about what is a true macro lens and how that varies from a close-up lens and what some of the implications are. So when you look through a spec sheet of a lens, you'll see a reproduction ratio, and that's basically a product of what the focal length is, like a 50mm, a 90mm, a 200mm, and how close it will let you focus. Now, a true macro lens gets to 1-to-1 reproduction. Now, what that means is that something that is 1 centimeter in real life will be replicated at 1 centimeter in size on your camera's sensor. So that means if you're, shooting a 2.5 centimeter bug and it's replicated at 2.5 centimeters on what is effectively quite a small sensor, then the whole frame is filled up with the bug and you can just get oodles and oodles of detail. But one of the trade-offs though is that, this is just a matter of physics, it happens with every lens, as your magnification or your reproduction ratio gets bigger, your depth of field really falls away. That's just how it is. As you get closer to something or zoom in further, at every given f-stop you have less depth of field, which you can go to an online calculator. We'll link one below to show you all of that. So how you get around that with a macro lens is, a lens like this one will let you shoot all the way up to f64. Now that may sound absolutely incredible and difficult, but you just need it. Let me give you an example. So this lens, being 90mm, focuses down to 30 centimeters. And you want to keep in mind, that's not 30 centimeters from the front of your lens, it's 30 centimeters from your sensor plane, which on cameras is always denoted by this little circle with a line through it. So when we actually are shooting, we've got our hood on, we're at closest focus, that makes the focus right about there. That's where my focus is, just 5 centimeters in front of the hood, or a total of 3 or 4 inches in front of the actual front of the lens. So you're getting super close to things. Now, talking depth of field, at 30 centimeters, at say f8, we're only going to have 3.7 millimeters, or 0.15 of an inch total depth of field. Absolutely tiny. When we go to say f32 to get loads more depth of field, still at our closest focus, you're going to have 1.5 centimeters or 0.59 of an inch. And if you go to f64, that doubles and you get about 3 centimeters or 1.2 inches. But still, we're talking about tiny little amounts. And of course, being f64 or f32 requires a whole lot of extra light, and we're going to come back to that. So let's talk about making macros, and in this situation I'm talking about traditional macros where you're shooting something that's tiny and you're getting up nice and close to it. I'm going to run through and give you my 5 top tips. The first one, and this is for the purists, for those who want to get absolute best practice, and it's something I don't really do. If you get really into it, you want to be using a tripod or focusing rails to get absolutely really accurate and stable focus on whatever you're shooting. Having covered off number 1, let's move on to the ones that are more practical about being out and shooting actually in the field, which more represent the way I like to shoot. So point 2 is consider hand holding. Now, it's really going to depend, of course, if your subject is moving. Well, any method on a tripod or hand holding is going to be incredibly difficult. And here to shoot, we say you're going to shoot it with autofocus, you're really going to need a lot of light to be able to shoot it at higher f numbers and to be able to get a shutter speed that works for you. Say at 90mm you want to be at, for example, 125th of a second to get rid of any wobbles. You're going to need it to be a really bright sunny day, or potentially add some light, we'll come back to that, to be able to get a usable hand-holding shot. You really don't want to be pushing your ISO through the roof because you're going to blur and lose so much color and tonal and detail range in your shot, which is kind of what macro is all about. Okay, so point 3. Autofocus versus manual focus. Now, autofocus with this lens, it's really nice and fast. If you're in a bright enough situation, it can be a really great option for you. I often find that manual focus is a great option though, in two ways. One, I'll just pop it to manual focus, put it to closest focus, and then slowly move towards my subject. When I see it's in focus, I fire it off and I know that I've gotten the shot. Another way is that if you are using a camera that's got a great screen or EVF where you can zoom in, or just put it onto live view and zoom in with your DSLR, you can really see when the exact part that you want is in sharp focus. Especially with new cameras like my Nikon D5, it just works an absolute treat. And if you get really into it and you're shooting DSLR, you might want to consider getting a custom focusing screen for your camera. These are basically split screens that they had in old film cameras for manual focusing that will clearly show you through the viewfinder much more easily when it's in perfect focus. So that's something you might want to keep in mind, and a lot of cameras actually, it's not too difficult to fit those these days. So let's walk through a couple of different demos here. First off, taking a look at this shot of the Piranha. So for this one, my friend was holding it, it was nice and still. I could easily shoot this autofocus or manual focus. But because I wanted to make sure I got most of the head in, it's not a true macro, it's not 1:1 reproduction ratio. And I just fired this away with autofocus. Now this one, you might think is a good one to get in really close slowly. That's actually a Brazilian wandering spider. They're hugely dangerous and terrifying. You can Google what they do to you before they die, before you die if they bite you. In that part of the jungle, if you're bitten, it's just a death sentence, and they have the biggest fangs of any spider. They'll bite through your shoe and your big toenail to deliver their venom. Crazy. So for that, I absolutely did not want to be just slowly inching forward, waiting for it to jump at me. I picked a distance that I was comfortable away, and then I autofocused on it. And you can see the background is so black there. How we did that comes into point 4. Now you're often going to want to add some light to your shots because of, well, one, in those kind of conditions, shooting in the jungle, when you're under the canopy, it's already quite dark even in the middle of daytime. So even if you were shooting at f8, getting a usable shutter speed can be difficult. So when you're going to f32 and 64, it can be really, really difficult. So pretty much everyone on our trip was using some form of ring light or macro light. Some had a continuous LED unit, which is quite great because that helped you for focusing as well. Others, like me, I was using an external flash-based ring light system, and you just throw that on and it works a treat. You get so much light into your shot. The great thing is your flash actually acts as a shutter for your shot. Because you're up close and the flash is primarily the only light in the shot, even if your shutter speed was down at a 60th of a second, the flash goes off in thousandths of a second, almost instantaneously, and it freezes your subject for you. So it actually acts as an artificial shutter for your shot by cutting the light on and off so quickly. Take a look at this shot of the tarantula. Now that's a full shot of its body. It was huge, like the size of my hand, just enormous. That's actually the shell of one that had just shed that day, they thought. And of course, being that this was just a shell, there was no real danger to me. This was one where I really could just put it to manual focus and keep going as close as I wanted and really take my time, because there was no chance that this thing was going to jump to life and bite me. It was just the shell laying there, although it was really fresh. I think it had only been off for a couple of hours according to our guide. So for this shot, I got up really close, and this is taken, I took a series at f45 through to f64, and you can see the venom delivery mechanism in the tooth. It looks like big carved wooden fangs. That's actually the little, less than an inch long fangs. Well, they're huge, but, relatively speaking. So we're realizing a huge amount of detail there, but you see I'm still getting so little depth of field. Now, a quick point on light. You might think, how can a flash like that possibly give you enough light? f64, after all, is 9 stops from f2.8. So that means we're getting a 1/512th the amount of light come through our shot. So that's practically nothing. But the thing you need to keep in mind is that it's not like we're shooting at f64 and the light is miles away. It's right up on top of the subject. So there's hardly any light fall off in that distance. So your flash suddenly becomes far more efficient and it's incredibly intense on the subject that you're shooting. Okay, as my last point on this series, I want to talk to you about where should you focus. Now, generally speaking in photography, if you want to maximize your depth of field, you want to use all of the area that's in sharp focus to be useful, then you want to focus a third of the way into your shot. If, for example, you're trying to get just my tip of my nose to my ears in sharp focus and then have it falling off, you don't want to focus on the tip of my nose, because a third of the focus will be in front and 2/3 will be behind. You actually want to focus, around the eyes, so then the third forward catches the nose and the 2/3 backwards captures the ear. That's in general photography. However, as you get closer and closer to true macro, a 1-to-1 reproduction, that moves from being, saying from my nose here, a third in front and 2/3 behind, it actually shifts to being about 50-50. Almost exactly 50-50. So once you're getting up to true macro, you want to focus halfway into what's important. So in that case, if you're focusing on the bug, you want to make sure you get halfway along its eye, if getting the whole eye in focus is what's important. But of course, that raises a really important point. Do you need to have everything in sharp focus? A lot of people in macro absolutely do want everything in sharp focus. But I actually think, like all forms of photography, sometimes having parts of your macro in sharp focus and intentionally blurring out other parts can be really nice. Let's take a look at this shot of a caterpillar. This first one was taken at f/25. It's sharp throughout, and it shows the leaves and the tree it was on. It shows context about the animal. So it works. However, it's not a true macro. I'm further away, and that's not a 1-to-1 reproduction ratio. I wanted to get a different vantage point on it and really focus in on its head and all of the little sticky bits that it has coming off it. So I changed the angle, got in much closer, and for this one, even though by being closer I'm getting a shallower depth of field, I actually dropped my aperture from f/25 down to like f/20, and here I'm just getting the head in and blurring out all of that background. And a cool thing that you want to keep in mind about the fall off of light is, by having the light right up on top of our bug, it gets lit intensely, but just 5 centimeters behind that, the light falls off a huge amount and will go dark. Like the shot of that Brazilian wandering spider, if I'd been using a light from a long way away, it and all of the background would be lit up to an extent. Having it up really close, it's intense on the object, and then it falls away rapidly. So you can get those shots that kind of look a little bit studio-ish because the background has disappeared into darkness. So that's probably enough creepy crawlies to show you how to get some excellent shots with your macro lens. I've used all the different generations of the Tamron macros, and this one is an obvious step forward. The image quality is just fantastic, the build quality is fantastic, and the autofocus is working the best out of any of them. Now, a lot of people like to use their macro lenses for portraiture. Of course, it's a 90mm 2.8 when you're shooting at those kind of portrait lengths. So there's fantastic opportunity there to get nice soft bokeh, and the fact that this is made to be super sharp can be great. Let me talk you through a little bit of my recent shoot with Kay. In this kind of environment, you really just need to think of this as a 90mm 2.8. Forget the fact that it's a macro. It's fast to focus. You can work with it in all the same ways that you would say your 70-200 set to 90mm. And you do realize a huge amount of information. I have to say, some people find this being so sharp is too much detail, that they find having all of that detail in the face and skin and pores and hair can be too much. I personally don't feel that. I want all the detail I can possibly get. I can edit it out if I want to. Generally, I don't though, because what other people see as flaws or imperfections, I actually see as just interesting things about the person. So I want to see every little hair follicle in their eyelashes. I would love to see skin pores in my shots. And still, being a 2.8, I'm able to get a nice blurred out background. Let's just take another look at some of those portraits. All of these are backlit. Now, backlit portraits are difficult and you often result in a lack of contrast, but you can see the design and codings in this 90mm macro are working beautifully to retain all of that detail. So if you haven't tried them out yet, check out Tamron's new range of SP lenses. I've been working with Tamron for years. They're 15 to 30, 24 to 70, 70 to 200, and now they've got their primes 35, 45, 85, and now the 90mm macro. They've really taken their game up a level. And this one, I think, in terms of bang for buck as a macro lens, it really is hard to beat. The results I've been getting with it, I'm really happy with, and it just works. Whether I'm shooting in studio or in the hotel with Kay, or literally in the jungle or in a swamp out on the road, never had an issue of it not being able to focus or the shots coming up looking a little bit mushy or anything like that. It does what it's supposed to do. Leave me any questions or comments that you might have and suggestions for other videos you'd like to see made. Maybe there's some more top 5 tips on different genres of photography you'd like, and I'll see you soon.